The night I begged my parents to help save my daughter's life, they chose a wedding over her survival. That was the moment I realized blood doesn't make family, love does. Left with nothing, I clawed my way back, carried by the sacrifice of those who truly stood by me. Now I've built a life stronger than the one they denied me. But when my story exposes their lies, I must decide. Do I give them forgiveness, or finally claim my freedom? The rain came down in sheets as I sprinted up the long drive to my parents' mansion. The kind of storm that made headlights smear into blinding streaks. My shoes slipped against the marble steps, and by the time I shoved through the doors, I was soaked to the skin. The warmth of the chandelier light should have been welcoming, but the looks on the faces turned toward me said otherwise. I wasn't an invited guest tonight. I was an interruption. Music drifted from the ballroom, violins, laughter, the delicate clink of champagne flutes. My brother Blake's engagement party. Their perfect son, their golden heir, celebrating in silken candlelight while my own daughter lay in a hospital bed, tube strapped to her frail body. My heart hammered against my ribs, half from the run, half from the dread of what I was about to do. Clara. My mother's voice cut like glass as she swept across the foyer in her navy gown. What on earth? Look at you, you're dripping on the rug. Mom, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. Please. I need to talk to you and Dad. It's Zoe. She collapsed again today. The doctors say she needs surgery, immediately. We don't have enough to cover it. I need help. Behind her, my father appeared, silver hair slicked back, his arm protective around a crystal glass of scotch. His frown deepened as though I were some reckless teenager tracking mud into his study, not a mother begging for her child's life. Clara, not now, he muttered, steering me toward the side hall. We have guests. Guests? The word broke out of me sharper than I meant. My daughter might die within 2 days if she doesn't get this surgery. 95,000. That's what the hospital quoted. Please. Blake appeared in the doorway of the ballroom, a champagne flute dangling between his fingers, his smirk already loaded. Always a scene, huh, sis? Couldn't even let me have one night without your drama? My chest tightened, fury pressing against grief. Drama? I'm asking Mom and Dad to help their granddaughter. He laughed, careless and cruel. They've already spent a fortune. On something worthwhile. My wedding. Deposits don't come cheap. The words landed like a physical blow. I remembered Zoe's face earlier that day, pale beneath fluorescent lights, asking in a whisper if the doctors would fix her heart so she could go back to school. I remembered Ethan, my husband, gripping my hand in silence, his eyes red from exhaustion. I'd promised her we'd find a way. And here I stood, soaked and shaking, while my own family treated me like a nuisance. Clara, Mom sighed, her eyes scanning the foyer as though worried the guests might overhear. We've already committed. Blake's wedding is in 3 months. The venue, catering, honeymoon, all of it. We can't just throw that away. You're throwing Zoe away, I whispered. For a moment, silence. Dad's jaw tightened. Mom smoothed her pearls with shaking fingers. Blake downed the rest of his champagne. The final verdict was written in their silence before it was spoken. You should have planned better, Dad said finally. Life doesn't wait for anyone to get their finances in order. I sank to my knees without meaning to, my wet palms pressing against their polished floor. Please. I've never asked you for anything. Not when Ethan lost his job, not when the roof leaked, not when we couldn't buy Christmas presents. But I'm begging now. She's your granddaughter. Mom flinched but didn't move toward me. Dad only looked at his watch. Get up, Clara. This is beneath you. Blake's chuckle filled the silence. God, you make everything about you. Do us a favor. Don't ruin the party. Go home, figure it out like an adult. Something inside me cracked then. Not with rage, not even despair. Something quieter, more final. The last sliver of hope that my family might one day choose me. Choose Zoe, over their endless pursuit of appearances. I rose slowly, the wet fabric of my dress clinging to my skin like chains. Fine, I said, my voice colder than the storm outside. I'll remember this. All of it. I turned, each step measured, deliberate, my heels echoing in the marble foyer. Behind me, I heard Mom hiss at Blake to lower his voice, Dad muttering about keeping the guests entertained. Not one of them called after me. Not one of them followed. The rain swallowed me again as I stepped back into the night. It soaked through every layer, but I barely felt it. I walked past the rows of luxury cars lining the driveway, past the glowing windows where laughter spilled into the storm. My hands shook as I reached Ethan's old sedan, parked at the far edge like it didn't belong. Like me. I slid into the passenger seat. Ethan turned toward me, eyes searching my face for hope. I couldn't give him any. They said no. I whispered. He closed his eyes, head falling back against the headrest. For a moment, the sound of rain filled the car, steady and merciless. Then his hand found mine, rough and warm despite the storm. Then we'll find another way, he said. His voice didn't waver, though I could feel the tremor in his grip. I nodded, staring back at the mansion shrinking in the rearview mirror. My parents had chosen their legacy. I would choose mine. And I swore, right there in that storm, I would never bow before them again. The night after the mansion, Ethan and I sat at the kitchen table, the laminate scarred from years of use. Bills, loan applications, and Zoe's medical forms were spread across the surface like some cruel collage of our failures. The storm outside had given way to silence, but inside the apartment the air felt heavier than any thundercloud. We'll start with the banks again, Ethan said, his voice ragged from too little sleep and too many forced smiles at Zoe's bedside. His hand raked through his hair, leaving it in desperate disarray. Somebody has to listen. I nodded, though my chest already knew the answer. We'd called every bank in town, begged for emergency loans, offered collateral we didn't have. My credit score was riddled with late payments from the months we'd stretched groceries instead of bills. Ethan's freelance work kept us afloat, but only barely. No bank wanted to hear a sob story when their computers spit out numbers that screamed risk. Still we tried. The next morning, Zoe's tiny voice called from her room. "Mommy, can I have juice?" She sat propped against pillows, her favorite stuffed rabbit limp in her arms. I kissed her forehead, hiding the way my stomach twisted at how cool her skin felt. Every breath sounded like it cost her more than she had to give. "Apple or orange?" I asked, forcing a brightness I didn't feel. She smiled faintly. "Both. Mix them." Her resilience shredded me. She didn't know about deadlines or invoices stamped past due. She only knew her heart was tired. When she dozed off again, Ethan and I set out. We spent the day moving from one sterile office to another, sitting across from men in suits who practiced sympathy without cost. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hart," one banker said, his polished nails tapping a denial letter. "Without collateral, our hands are tied." Collateral. As if the roof over our heads or the car that carried Ethan to every odd job weren't enough. But the truth was harsher. We had nothing left to mortgage. Our possessions were already listed on online marketplaces. My grandmother's dining set, Ethan's camera equipment, even the rocking chair where I nursed Zoe as a baby. The offers trickled in, pennies against the mountain we owed. That night, Ethan sat staring at his car keys. His old Mustang, the one he restored with grease-stained hands and weekend sacrifices, sat gleaming faintly under the streetlight outside. He'd poured his youth into that machine. "Don't," I whispered, my throat raw. He looked at me, eyes bloodshot. "She needs this more than I need a car." The next morning, the Mustang was gone. Ethan placed the crumpled check on the table like a wound that wouldn't clot. $8,000. He didn't speak for hours. I tried to drown my guilt in phone calls. Hospitals, charities, churches, even crowdfunding platforms. Each rejection felt sharper than the last. A polite nurse explained their foundation was over capacity for this quarter. A church treasurer promised prayers but no money. Strangers online scrolled past Zoe's photo, maybe clicking like, maybe not. By the third day, our world had shrunk to the apartment and the hospital. The walls pressed closer each time Zoe coughed. Each beep of the heart monitor a reminder that we were running out of time. I carried the sound of it in my chest, even when I wasn't by her side. "Clara," Ethan said one night, his head in his hands. "What if we can't?" The words hung between us, poisonous and unspoken until now. "We will," I insisted, though my voice cracked. "We don't stop until she's safe." But deep down, terror gnawed. Every door we knocked on seemed to slam shut. Every plea echoed back empty. My parents' refusal replayed in my mind, Blake's laughter cutting through my resolve. They'd chosen to pour fortunes into flowers and tuxedos while my daughter's life bled away by the hour. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass of our bedroom window, watching rain smear the city lights. Behind me, Ethan shifted restlessly on the bed, muttering in dreams that sounded more like prayers. I thought of Zoe's small fingers curled around her stuffed rabbit, her whispered question in the hospital. "Will it hurt, Mommy?" I promised her it wouldn't. But promises don't pay surgeons. The world had turned its back on us. Family, banks, charities, every door closed. But in the hollow silence that followed, I felt something stir. A new vow, raw and jagged, rising through the cracks of despair. If the world wouldn't open its doors, I'd build my own. Dawn crept into the apartment through thin curtains, painting the walls with a pale light that made everything look brittle. I hadn't slept. My body was tired, but my mind refused to stop replaying the last few days. Bankers shaking their heads, my parents turning away, Ethan selling the Mustang with a look in his eyes that nearly broke me. The kettle hissed on the stove, steam curling into the air. I poured water into 2 chipped mugs, dropping tea bags inside like they were spells I hoped might summon strength. Ethan stumbled into the kitchen, his hair a mess, his shoulders bent. "You didn't sleep either," I said. He shook his head, rubbing his eyes. Every time I closed them, I saw her, with that mask on her face. I kept hearing the monitor. His voice cracked. "What if we're too late?" I set the mug in front of him, then pressed my hands to his cheeks. His skin was rough from days without shaving, but warm. "We're not too late. We can't be." The knock came then. Sharp, unexpected, shattering the fragile quiet of morning. Ethan stiffened, glancing toward the door. We weren't expecting anyone. I pulled it open and froze. Tom and Denise, Ethan's parents, stood on the threshold. Denise clutched her purse like it weighed 100 pounds. Tom, usually steady as an oak, shifted uncomfortably on his boots. Their faces carried the exhaustion of sleepless nights, but also something else, a determination I hadn't seen before. "Mom, Dad," Ethan said, his voice hoarse with surprise. "We heard," Tom said simply. His voice was gravel, but steady. "About Zoe." My throat closed. I hadn't called them. Shame had kept me silent. Asking for help after a lifetime of being told I wasn't enough. It felt like failure carved into bone. But here they were, uninvited, unshaken. Denise stepped forward, her hand trembling as she opened her purse. She pulled out a thick envelope, worn and creased from being held too tightly. She placed it on the table between our mugs. "What is this?" I whispered. "Our cabin," Tom said, his jaw tightening. "We sold it." Ethan's head snapped up. "You what?" "The cabin in Montana," Denise explained, her eyes glistening. "We had plans: retirement, summers with grandkids, fishing. But Zoe needs this more than we need a place to sit by the lake." My hands trembled as I reached for the envelope. The paper was rough beneath my fingertips, the weight undeniable. I slid it open and gasped at the neat stacks of bills inside. $38,000. More than enough to push us over the threshold. I can't," I stammered, pushing it back toward them. "This is your dream. You can't just." "Family comes first," Tom interrupted, his deep voice cutting through my protest. "Dreams can wait. Children can't." Tears blurred my vision. Denise reached across the table, wrapping my cold fingers in her warm, steady ones. "You don't need to carry this alone anymore, Clara. Let us help. Please." Ethan pressed his fists against his forehead, shaking with emotion. "Dad, Mom, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll use it," Tom replied. "Say you'll save our granddaughter." The dam inside me broke. Sobs tore through my chest as I clutched Denise's hand. All the rejection of the last week, the slammed doors, the laughter of my brother, the coldness of my parents, collapsed beneath the weight of this one undeniable act of love. They didn't ask for anything in return. They didn't weigh my worth in reputation or appearances. They just gave. Ethan pulled me into his arms, his shoulders shaking as he cried into my hair. For the first time in days, I felt something shift inside me. Not hope, not yet, but something like it. When the tears subsided, we sat together in silence, the envelope between us like a fragile miracle. Denise busied herself making more tea, moving around my cramped kitchen as though she'd done it 100 times. Tom pulled Zoe's stuffed rabbit from the couch, smoothing its worn fur before setting it gently beside her schoolbooks. "She's going to be okay," Denise whispered. "She has to be." I stared at the envelope again, my chest tight with gratitude and disbelief. My own parents had chosen parties and champagne over their granddaughter's life. Ethan's parents had given up the only piece of land they owned. The contrast was brutal, undeniable. That night, as we signed the hospital paperwork with shaking hands, I kept hearing Tom's words. Family comes first. And for the first time in my life, I understood what family really meant. Hospitals have a way of stretching time until it no longer makes sense. The fluorescent lights never dim. The monitors beep in rhythms that blur into the beat of your own heart. And every second feels like an hour. By the time the double doors closed behind Zoe's gurney, I couldn't tell whether it was morning or midnight. We sat in the waiting room, me, Ethan, and his parents, surrounded by outdated magazines and the faint scent of antiseptic. The plastic chair beneath me felt harder with each passing minute, but I didn't dare move. If I did, it would feel like I was giving myself permission to rest, and resting wasn't an option when your child's chest was open under a surgeon's hands. I clutched Zoe's stuffed rabbit so tightly that my knuckles ached. Its fur was matted, worn from years of hugs, but I held it as if it were the fragile thread tying me to her. Ethan sat beside me, elbows on his knees, his fingers interlaced in a white-knuckled grip. His parents flanked us, silent but steady, anchors in a sea of uncertainty. Hours passed. Nurses walked briskly in and out, their shoes squeaking against polished floors. Each time the door opened, I sat up straighter, my lungs stalling with hope that someone would come to tell me it was over, that Zoe was safe. But each time, the nurse moved past without slowing, leaving me suspended in that unbearable limbo. At one point, Denise placed a thermos of coffee in my hands. "Drink," she urged softly, her eyes full of the kind of love I hadn't known from parents before. I tried, but the bitter liquid stuck in my throat, my stomach too knotted to accept it. I set the cup down and returned to gripping the rabbit, afraid that if I let go, something irreversible might happen on the other side of those doors. The worst moments were the ones when my mind betrayed me. Flashing images of Zoe's small body still and silent, of surgeons shaking their heads. I pressed my forehead to my fists, whispering her name like a mantra. "Come back to me, baby. Please come back." Beside me, Ethan broke once. Just once. A strangled sob escaped him, his shoulders shaking as he tried to hide it. I wrapped an arm around him, surprised at the strength I still had to offer. "She's strong," I whispered. "Stronger than all of us. She's going to fight." Tom leaned forward then, his weathered hands clasped tight. "She's got winter's blood in her too," he said firmly. "And that blood doesn't give up." The certainty in his voice held me together in ways my own thoughts couldn't. By the 10th hour, I was pacing the length of the waiting room, counting tiles on the floor to keep from unraveling. Denise sat with her rosary, lips moving in silent prayer. Ethan tried to sleep but jolted awake every few minutes, his body unwilling to surrender. Tom stared straight ahead, unblinking, as if he could will Zoe through the operation by sheer force. Finally, the doors swung open. The surgeon stepped out, his cap still in place, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. My knees nearly gave out. I rushed forward, my voice breaking before I could form a proper question. "She made it," he said. His words landed like light after endless night. "The surgery was long but successful. Her heart is stable. We'll keep her in intensive care for the next few days, but she's going to make it." The sob that tore from my chest was unlike anything I'd ever known. Relief, grief, joy, all twisted into one. Ethan caught me as my body folded against him, his own tears hot against my hair. Tom let out a shaky exhale, while Denise pressed trembling hands to her face, whispering a thank you to every saint she could name. When the surgeon left, I sank into my chair again, weaker now that the adrenaline had passed. My hands trembled as I stroked the rabbit's fur. "She's okay," I kept repeating, needing to hear it aloud. "She's okay." Ethan's parents wrapped us both in their arms, the four of us holding on like survivors clinging to the same raft. My own parents hadn't even called, hadn't shown up to see if their granddaughter lived or died. That knowledge carved a scar I knew would never fully heal. But for now, in that sterile waiting room, surrounded by the hum of machines and the smell of disinfectant, all I cared about was one thing. Zoe's heart was still beating. And with it, mine was too. The first days after the surgery blurred together, but not from exhaustion. This time it was relief. Relief that I could sit beside Zoe and watch the gentle rise and fall of her chest. Hear the steady rhythm of her new heartbeat, instead of the ragged gasps that haunted me for months. Her room in the pediatric ward became our world. The walls were pale blue, decorated with faded decals of butterflies and balloons. A heart monitor hummed beside her, its gentle beeping a sound that once terrified me, but now felt like music. Ethan never left her side, and his parents became a constant presence. Every morning, Denise swept into the room carrying something homemade. Soup, muffins, pasta, food that wrapped around us like a blanket. Tom read stories in his deep, gravelly voice until Zoe's eyelids fluttered shut. They weren't just filling space. They were filling the silence with love, the kind that didn't need to be earned. I caught myself watching them more than once, overwhelmed by the quiet devotion in their every gesture. My own parents hadn't so much as called, yet here were Ethan's, trading sleep and comfort for hours in a hospital chair. Denise hummed lullabies as she adjusted Zoe's blanket. Tom patiently untangled 4 lines like a seasoned sailor. These were the grandparents my daughter deserved. Zoe's recovery was slow, each small improvement celebrated like a victory. The first time she asked for ice cream, Ethan nearly cried. "Strawberry or chocolate?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Both," Zoe answered with a sleepy grin. Denise slipped out and returned 15 minutes later with a small bowl, pink and brown swirled together. It wasn't just about food or stories. It was the way they listened when Zoe whispered about her fears, never dismissing them. The way Tom brought a small fishing rod and pretended to teach her how to cast it from her hospital bed, promising real lakes and real fish when she was stronger. One afternoon, as Denise brushed Zoe's hair into soft braids, Ethan leaned close to me. "Do you see it now?" he whispered. "See what?" "What family really looks like." His eyes shone, and I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. But the contrast was impossible to ignore. A cream-colored envelope arrived one morning, delivered by a nurse who looked more uncomfortable than usual. The return address was unmistakable, my parents'. My stomach twisted as I tore it open. Inside was an embossed invitation to Blake's wedding, addressed only to me. No mention of Ethan, no mention of Zoe. Just me. As if I were still the obedient daughter they could parade at parties, separate from the life I'd built. I stared at the paper until the letters blurred. My daughter lay in a hospital bed, fighting for strength, while my parents spent fortunes on centerpieces and champagne. They hadn't even picked up the phone to ask if she'd survived the surgery. All they offered was a seat at a party where appearances mattered more than love. I tossed the invitation into the trash before Zoe could see it. Ethan squeezed my hand, his jaw tight. "You don't owe them anything," he said firmly. He was right. My parents had made their choice, and I was making mine. Instead, I poured my energy into gratitude, into the people who had shown up. Ethan's parents continued to surprise me with their generosity. They brought puzzles, coloring books, even a handmade quilt embroidered with Zoe's name. At night, I sometimes found them asleep in stiff plastic chairs, refusing to go home until they were sure Zoe was comfortable. One evening, as Zoe drifted to sleep, Tom caught my eye. "She's a fighter," he said softly. "Reminds me of her mom." The words pierced straight through me. I hadn't felt like a fighter in so long, just a desperate woman clawing at closed doors. But hearing it from him, from someone who had given up his retirement dream without hesitation, made me believe it again. Days turned into weeks. Zoe's scar healed into a thin pink line across her chest, a reminder of the battle she had won. With each step she took down the hallway, clinging to her 4-pole, we celebrated as if she had crossed a finish line. Ethan's parents cheered louder than anyone. One afternoon, I returned from grabbing coffee to find Zoe asleep, her rabbit tucked beneath her chin. Denise sat beside her, knitting something small and pink, while Tom quietly read a book by the window. The sight stopped me cold. It looked like the picture I'd always carried in my mind of what family should be. Love steady and unquestioned, not conditional on reputation or appearances. Tears welled in my eyes, but this time, they weren't from despair. They were from gratitude. For the first time in my life, I felt surrounded by a family who showed up when it mattered most. My parents had sent an invitation. Ethan's parents gave us everything else. And I knew which choice I'd remember. Opportunity rarely arrives when life feels steady. More often, it barges in while you're still catching your breath. That's how it came to me. 2 weeks after Zoe was discharged, when I was still folding hospital bills into messy stacks and praying the new medication wouldn't eat through what little savings we had left. The email subject line read, "Invitation to present, Westbrook Hotel Group." At first, I thought it was a mistake, maybe even spam. But when I opened it, my heart jolted. They wanted me to pitch a redesign for their flagship property downtown. A multi-million-dollar contract, the kind of project I had dreamed about but never dared imagine landing. I read it twice before showing Ethan. His brow furrowed, then lifted in awe. "This could change everything," he whispered. The words thrilled and terrified me in equal measure. I wasn't ready. My portfolio was modest, my studio non-existent, my confidence still fragile after months of begging and rejection. But then I looked at Zoe asleep on the couch, her stuffed rabbit clutched against her chest. If she could fight for her life, how could I not fight for our future? Preparation became my new obsession. Days blurred into nights at the kitchen table, sketches spread across every surface. Ethan's parents stepped in without hesitation. Denise handled bedtime stories, Tom chauffeured Zoe to checkups, and Ethan juggled work with childcare so I could focus. For the first time, I worked without fear of being interrupted by a bill collector or a hospital emergency. Still, doubt crept in during quiet hours. Who was I to think I could compete with established firms, with offices in glass towers and portfolios printed on glossy paper? The morning of the presentation, I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing down my blazer. My reflection didn't look like someone who belonged in boardrooms. But then Zoe padded into the room, her hair still wild from sleep. She reached out and touched my hand. "You'll win, Mommy," she said simply. The certainty in her voice broke through my fear. I kissed her forehead, held her longer than I should have, then left for the meeting with Ethan's parents, waving encouragement from the doorway. The conference room was intimidating. Polished wood, panoramic city views, 5 executives in tailored suits. My hands trembled as I set up my boards, but when I began to speak, something shifted. I didn't hide my story. Instead, I let it guide me. I spoke of spaces designed not just for beauty, but for the people who lived, celebrated, and healed inside them. I told them about the cabin Ethan's parents sold, about the redesign I gifted them after, how every detail reflected who they were. Their eyes softened, the skepticism replaced by curiosity. By the time I revealed my concepts, warm, functional, human, they weren't just listening. They were leaning forward. "Why should we choose you over established firms?" the CEO asked finally. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to meet his gaze. "Because I know what it means to build something from nothing," I said. "I don't design for portfolios. I design for people. And that's what makes a space unforgettable." The silence afterward was suffocating. Then the CEO smiled, just faintly. "Thank you, Ms. Hart. We'll be in touch." I left the building shaky, unsure whether I'd soared or collapsed. But Ethan was waiting outside, his arms strong around me. "Whatever happens," he murmured, "I'm proud of you." 3 days later, the call came. I had won the contract. I sank onto the floor, the phone slipping from my hand as tears poured down my face. Ethan swept me up, spinning me in circles while Zoe squealed from the couch, clapping her small hands. Denise cried openly. Tom grinned until his cheeks ached. For the first time in months, the future didn't feel like a locked door. It felt like a window thrown wide open. This was my chance to rise. And I wasn't going to waste it. Success doesn't arrive like a lightning strike. It creeps in slowly, a steady flame you almost don't notice until the whole room glows. That's how it felt in the months after winning the Westbrook contract. What began as sketches on my kitchen table turned into site visits, team meetings, and conference calls that filled my calendar from dawn until late night. I rented a tiny office downtown, just 2 rooms above a bakery. The scent of fresh bread greeting me each morning. At first it was just me, my laptop, and rolls of fabric samples stacked against the wall. Then came Maria, a junior designer with sharp instincts and boundless energy. A week later, I hired Jonah, a contractor with an eye for detail and a knack for solving problems before I even noticed them. Piece by piece, a studio took shape. Not just a workplace, but a vision. Winter's Design Studio. The name looked surreal stenciled across the frosted glass door. Meanwhile, Ethan's parents continued to be our foundation. Denise became Zoe's constant companion, ferrying her between appointments and school, always with a thermos of homemade soup tucked into her bag. Tom built her a wooden dollhouse, every miniature room designed with the same care he once poured into their cabin. They never complained about the sacrifices they'd made. Instead, they celebrated every small win with us. When I signed the Westbrook contract, they brought champagne. When Zoe aced her first spelling test after recovery, Tom taped the paper to their refrigerator like it was a diploma. But whispers reached me from another corner of the world, the one I had left behind. A colleague mentioned my parents' furniture business was struggling, that some of their longtime clients had begun pulling out. I felt a flicker of something, satisfaction maybe or pity, but I pushed it aside. My energy belonged to growth, not ghosts. The true joy came in giving back. After the first payment from Westbrook cleared, I called Tom and Denise into the office. I slid a set of keys across the table. "What's this?" Tom asked, frowning. "A house," I said softly. "Your new one." Denise's hand flew to her mouth. "Clara, no. You can't." "I can. And I want to. You gave up your cabin to save Zoe. This is me giving a fraction of that love back." They tried to refuse, but I insisted. When they finally accepted, tears streamed down Denise's cheeks, and Tom cleared his throat so many times he couldn't get a word out. That night, we all stood in the empty living room of their new home. Zoe raced through the halls, her laughter echoing against freshly painted walls. For the first time in years, I felt something settle inside me. A circle closing, not perfectly, but enough. My own parents never called. Not when the news featured my work. Not when Zoe's surgery was written about in a local hospital newsletter. Silence was their only gift, and I accepted it. By Winter's Design Studio had doubled in size. We secured contracts in Seattle and San Diego, and Jonah joked we'd need hard hats with our logo soon. I watched Maria present her first design pitch to a client, her hands trembling but her voice steady. When they approved her concept, she glanced at me, her smile radiant. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about buildings or hotels. It was about people. About giving others the chance to rise the way Ethan's parents had given me mine. One evening, after a long day on site, Ethan found me sitting at the office window, looking out at the city lights. He slid his arms around me, his chin resting on my shoulder. "Do you realize what you've built?" he murmured. I thought of Zoe's laughter, of Tom and Denise's new home, of Maria's triumphant smile. I thought of how far we'd come from that night at my parents' mansion, rain dripping onto marble floors. "Yes," I whispered. "And I'm not done yet." The first time I saw my name in print, I didn't believe it was real. The magazine arrived on a Tuesday morning, slid under my office door in a neat brown envelope. I tore it open with shaking hands, and there it was, a full spread featuring Winter's Design Studio. My photo stared back at me, framed by bold type. "Rising from ashes. How Clara Winters built a legacy from betrayal." I sat at my desk for a long time, staring at those words. They didn't feel like mine. They felt borrowed from someone stronger. Someone who hadn't knelt on her parents' marble floor begging for her daughter's life. But as I read, I realized the story wasn't just about failure or pain. It was about what came after. The journalist had captured everything. The night I burst into my parents' mansion drenched in rain, their refusal to help, Tom and Denise selling their cabin, the surgery, and the business I built in the aftermath. I'd spoken to the reporter in a cramped coffee shop, half afraid that sharing my truth would make me look bitter. Instead, he'd listened with steady eyes, urging me to tell it all, unvarnished. "People need to hear this," he'd said. I hadn't realized how true those words were until the article spread like wildfire. By noon, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Former clients congratulated me. Strangers emailed stories of their own betrayals. Single parents reached out, thanking me for naming a pain they thought only they carried. But not all the responses were kind. A screenshot landed in my inbox, an online comment thread where my mother's friends debated whether I'd exaggerated. Surely no parents would choose a wedding over their granddaughter's life, one wrote. Another replied, she's always been dramatic. I almost closed my laptop, almost shut it all down. Then Zoe came bounding into the room, hair flying, clutching the article with sticky fingers. "Mommy, you're famous," she squealed, planting the magazine on my lap. Famous wasn't the right word. Seen, that was what I was. For the first time, the truth wasn't just inside me festering. It was out there, undeniable. The fallout came quickly. Within days, whispers about my parents' furniture business spread through the city. Longtime partners cut ties. A charity gala they hosted lost half its donors after the article circulated. My brother Blake called Ethan one night, his voice dripping with anger. "How could she do this to us?" Ethan didn't flinch. "She didn't do anything to you. She told the truth." I expected to feel triumphant, but what washed over me instead was clarity. For years, I thought I was the broken one, desperate for scraps of approval. Now the cracks in their perfect image showed plainly, and it had nothing to do with me. My studio, on the other hand, thrived. The article brought new clients, people who wanted more than polished surfaces. They wanted authenticity. A hotel chain reached out after reading about Tom and Denise's cabin, saying, "We want that kind of heart in our spaces." One afternoon, Maria found me staring at my inbox, overwhelmed by the flood of messages. "You changed the narrative," she said softly. "They wanted you small. Now the world sees you as you are." But there was one message I couldn't ignore. It came late at night, subject line, "We need to talk." The sender, my mother. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at the glowing screen while Zoe slept beside me. What could she possibly say? An apology? A plea? A justification wrapped in guilt? When I finally clicked, the words were as brittle as dried leaves. "You've embarrassed this family. Do you feel proud of yourself?" I closed the email, my chest strangely light. For once, her words didn't burrow into me. They slid right off, powerless. The story had sparked change, but not the kind my parents wanted. It hadn't destroyed me. It had freed me. And as I looked at Zoe's sleeping face, her tiny hand curled around her stuffed rabbit, I knew the real legacy wasn't in headlines or contracts. It was in the truth I chose to tell, so she would never mistake silence for strength. The knock on my office door was too soft to belong to a client. I knew before opening it who would be standing there. My parents. They looked smaller than I remembered. My father's silver hair, once slicked with authority, lay flat and thinning. My mother's pearls hung heavy against a dress that had lost its sheen. They weren't the polished figures who had dismissed me at Blake's engagement party. They were people stripped of their armor. "Clara," my mother said, her voice wobbling as though she were reaching for a role she no longer believed in. "May we come in?" I gestured toward the chairs across from my desk. Ethan stood at the window behind me, arms crossed, silent but solid. Tom and Denise's photo, taken in front of their new home, sat framed on my desk, a reminder of the family who had earned their place. My father cleared his throat. "You've done well for yourself." His voice tried for authority, but cracked under the weight of desperation. "But we're in trouble. The business is collapsing. The bank is circling. We need your help." The words hung in the air like smoke. Once they would have seared me. Now they only confirmed what I already knew. The empire they had chosen over their granddaughter's life was crumbling. "How much?" I asked, my tone calm, clinical. 160,000, my father replied. His eyes flicked to the floor, unable to meet mine. It would clear the debt and give us a chance to recover. I thought of Zoe's hospital bed, the beep of her monitors, the sound of my brother laughing while I begged on marble floors. I thought of Denise's warm hand over mine as she slid an envelope across my kitchen table. My mother leaned forward, clasping her hands. "We made mistakes, Clara. But surely you understand. Family should stand together in hard times." The word family tasted bitter. I rose from my chair and walked to the filing cabinet. My heels clicked against the polished wood floor, each step echoing louder than their pleas. I retrieved a black suitcase and placed it on the desk between us. When I snapped it open, neatly stacked bills filled the space. Their eyes widened. Relief flickered across their faces, but I raised a hand before either could reach for it. 160,000, I said evenly. Exactly what you asked for. Enough to pay the debt. Not a cent more. Tears welled in my mother's eyes. Oh, Clara. I cut her off. This isn't forgiveness. My voice was steady, sharper than I intended. This is closure. I'm giving you what you need so you will never come knocking on my door again. My father bristled. Were your parents? Yes, I replied. And when I begged you to help your granddaughter, you chose a party. You chose Blake's wedding over her life. Don't mistake this money for reconciliation. It's freedom, mine, not yours. Silence pressed heavy between us. My mother reached for the suitcase, her hands trembling. My father finally met my gaze, something broken flickering behind his stern mask. Ethan stepped forward then, his presence unmistakable. You should go, he said quietly. Clara has work to do. They rose slowly, the suitcase clutched between them like a lifeline. As they moved toward the door, my mother paused. We only wanted what was best for you, she whispered. I shook my head. No. You wanted what looked best. The door closed behind them. For a long time, I stood in silence, the echo of their footsteps fading into nothing. Then I turned back toward the window, where sunlight streamed across the city I had built a future in. The weight I had carried for years, the need for their approval, the ache of their rejection, slid off my shoulders. Not all at once, but enough. They had taken my pleas and left me to drown. I had built a life without them. And now, finally, I was free of their shadow. Closure, not forgiveness. That was enough. The backyard glowed with strings of golden lights, draped across oak branches like captured fireflies. Ethan grilled skewers on the patio while laughter carried across the grass. Tom sat on a folding chair, Zoe perched on his knee, pretending to reel in a fish with a stick and string. Denise passed out slices of homemade pie, her apron dusted with flour. This was what family sounded like. Not hushed judgments or whispered accusations, but laughter layered with the music of people who wanted to be together. I set a pitcher of lemonade on the picnic table, brushing Zoe's curls back from her forehead as she raced past. She was taller now, her scars fading into faint lines, reminders of what we had survived. Careful, I called. She waved without slowing, darting between chairs like she was flying. Ethan caught my gaze from the grill. He winked, and my chest filled with the same warmth I'd felt the first day we realized Zoe's heart was strong again. For so long, every breath had felt like a countdown. Now the only countdowns were for fireworks or birthday candles. Neighbors drifted in with their kids. My studio team showed up with a guitar and makeshift drum. The evening blurred into music, stories, and children shrieking with joy as they chased fireflies. No one kept score. No one reminded me of debts. This was chosen family in its purest form. At one point, Maria, my lead designer, handed me her phone. They published it, she whispered. On the screen glowed an online article, From Scarcity to Strength. How Clara Winters redefined family and business. My own words stared back. Blood may connect you, but love is proven in action. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt calm, like finally exhaling after years of holding my breath. Later, when the kids sprawled across blankets staring at constellations, Tom settled beside me. His weathered hand covered mine. You built this, he said. Not just the business. This. He gestured to the backyard filled with laughter. I shook my head. We built this. All of us. Denise sat down on my other side, nudging me gently. Your parents could never take this from you, she said. Because they never gave it. You earned it, Clara. You protected it. Zoe's voice rose from the blanket where she lay with her friends, her words carrying in the still night air. Grandma Denise, Grandpa Tom, look, the stars are dancing. They joined her on the grass without hesitation, tracing imaginary shapes in the sky. I watched them, my throat tight. My daughter would grow up never doubting who showed up for her. When the last guest left and the backyard fell quiet, Ethan pulled me close. The scent of smoke and summer clung to his shirt. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked softly. "Not forgiving them?" I thought of my parents, the marble foyer. The night I knelt for help that never came. I thought of handing them that suitcase of cash, my voice steady as I told them it wasn't forgiveness but freedom. I thought of the silence that followed, the void where their approval used to matter. "No," I whispered, "because forgiveness would have meant giving them back power. And I won't do that again. What I have now is better than forgiveness. It's peace." Ethan kissed my temple. "Then it's enough." It was. The night ended with Zoe asleep in my arms, her breath even and strong. I carried her inside, past the family photos lining the wall. Pictures not of who abandoned us, but of who stayed. Tom teaching her to fish. Denise reading bedtime stories. Ethan lifting her onto his shoulders at the beach. I tucked her into bed, smoothing the blanket across her chest. Her small hand found mine, even in sleep. I stood there for a long time, memorizing the rise and fall of her breathing, the way peace had finally returned to her face. Downstairs, I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped out onto the porch. The stars still glimmered overhead. The same ones I had stared at years ago when I thought I'd lost everything. Only now they didn't feel distant. They felt like they were keeping watch. Family, I realized, wasn't the people who shared your blood. It was the people who showed up when the storm came, and stayed until the sun returned. And here, in this home filled with laughter, scars and love, I finally had everything I needed.